So how do we practice Kundalini yoga, knowing what we know about this guy? So hello, I'm Ashley. I'm a business owner. I'm also a yoga teacher, and I always just in my own practice and in teaching try to get down to the essence of what I'm teaching. Before things came to the West and got appropriated by a lot of white-owned studios and instructors, I try to go to the essence, to the history, to the roots, and bring that out in my practice and also what I share. So Yogi Bhajan, he did not create Kundalini yoga because some silly little human didn't watch the pinned video on my profile explaining some of this and said, "Oh, he didn't create it, you're so stupid." And I was like, I literally said that in the video. No, he did not create Kundalini yoga. He brought it over here to the West, and that is why we practice it now. Because Kundalini yoga originally was more of a secretive, closed practice. But it was a practice that wasn't really practiced by kings and queens and highly esteemed people. It was practiced by your farmers, just kind of everyday people out in the world. And it was kind of more of a closed or secret practice because it wasn't really meant to be shared outside of the Indian lineage that it was already kind of floating around within. But Yogi Bhajan was like, oh, this is something interesting. I think he maybe traveled to like Canada or the US and was like, oh, these hippie people, they would really get down with something like this. And so, because he had already been practicing it, and he was like, well, I'm going to start some things up and start teaching these people who I know would eat it out of their palm of their hands this practice. And so that's what he did. He started teaching people in the US and just in the West, mostly Kundalini yoga. That's the whole reason why it's here. Otherwise, it probably maybe would have still been in India being shared by word of mouth between or amongst these different human beings. But essentially that's what he did. He created a whole practice, and allegations came out where people were starting to speak up, and it turned out that this guy was doing very unethical practices, basically creating a cult that was super, super strict, and people were just, again, eating his words out of the palm of his hand and subscribing to everything that he said, wearing all white, following his very strict guidelines, and his practice was very much the same. His form of Kundalini yoga, it's, not his practice, but his form of Kundalini yoga was just as strict as he was on his cult members. You have to wear all white. Movements are so many minutes long. You have to do so many movements. You have to do this specific breath with this movement. Very strict, very rigorous. So where do we go from here? Knowing all this, knowing what he taught was just kind of for his own gain in some sense, not to say that some of what he taught wasn't based in the traditional practices of Kundalini yoga, but where do we go from here? So where do we go from here, knowing what we know about Yogi Bhajan, and how do we practice the essence of Kundalini yoga? I'm going to make a part 2 about that, so you'll have to look out for that if you're interested. But I will say that a lot of yogis who have brought a yoga practice to the West, there have been a few of them that have done very similar things. And their practices have lived on. And for some of them, we can research and look at the roots and things beyond their lineage. In this case, it's a little tricky, but just keep that in mind.